Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for the warm introduction. My name is Katie, and here today to talk to you about REP. This is an intervention program that was created alongside or with myself and alongside two of my colleagues, Steve Kilgus and Andy Garbitz, who are at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Andy's our keynote today for lunch, so we let him off the hook for being here for this presentation, but did want to acknowledge my other two co-authors of this curriculum. Before we get started, would love to get a sense of who is in the room. So would just like to see how many of you are teachers. Great. School psychologists. Awesome. School social workers. Great. School counselors. Fantastic. Nurses. Wonderful. Any ABA folks or BCBA folks? Great. Principals or district administrators? Great. Any faculty or researchers? Wonderful. And then I'm trying to think of all, any SLPs, OTs, PTs, any other special education teachers in the room? Great. And then who else have I forgotten? All right. Wonderful. Great. Well, it's wonderful to be with school folks. I spent 10 years as a practitioner before I became a faculty member. I started my career as a school social worker and worked for 7 years, both in middle schools and high schools, and then as a mental health coordinator for a large school district in Denver. I grew up in the Denver area. And then went back and got my PhD in a combined clinical and school psychology program at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I then went back into schools and practiced for a few years as a school psychologist, which was fantastic. And then have been a faculty member and engaged in research on school mental health for about the last 9 years. So excited to talk to you all today about some of my work and specifically around this Tier 2 intervention. I'll also say that I have roots in Nebraska, so it's really good to be here. Both of my parents grew up outside the Omaha area. My dad was from Elkhorn, and my grandmother was a teacher at Skyline Elementary for 25 years, if anybody knows that area. And then my mom, grew up on a farm outside of Arlington, Nebraska, where my grandparents farmed till really their late 70s. So a lot of my childhood was spent on I-80 driving between Denver and Omaha. So this feels like home and is very familiar, which was great. I drove around town last night, and both of my parents went to the University of Nebraska, so grew up as a diehard Cornhusker fan. So good to be home. All right, so learning objectives. Those of you who are here, my hope is that you will gain information about how to implement REP. All of the materials for REP are freely available, and so we'll walk through giving you access to the curriculum and how you can implement it in your school. We also will talk about how to make cultural adaptations to the curriculum. Our goal with REP is to make it meaningful and accessible for all kids from all backgrounds and identities. And so we'll talk about how each unit can be modified. And then we'll also discuss some of the research that we have to date showing early evidence of this as an evidence-based intervention. So on our research team, we talk a lot about this 2020 phenomena that 20% of kids have some type of mental health concern at some point throughout their school trajectory that warrants help and support. However, only 20% of that group receives support for their concerns. So we have a large gap between those kids who need help and support and those who actually receive it. We also know that children who have mental health concerns, they often fall into two buckets or areas of concerns, right? Externalizing, which tends to get a lot of attention just by nature of that it can make other people's lives more difficult, as well as internalizing problems. And so certainly, excuse me as I've lost my mouse, and internalizing behavior concerns, which sometimes are challenging for us to be able to identify as educators, right? Because of the internalized nature of them. When we see kids who are struggling with things like depression or anxiety or withdrawal, we might start to see smaller indicators, but certainly can be a little bit harder to detect. There have been calls over the last 2 decades to be able to increase our ability to recognize these concerns in a more meaningful way. We certainly want to be able to address them before they reach clinical thresholds. And so the purpose of REP and some of the things we're going to be talking about today are what do those sub-threshold symptoms look like, right, before it becomes a diagnosable disorder. Hence why this is really focused around being a tier 2 intervention. A number of groups have called for an increased emphasis on targeted intervention for some of those sub-threshold symptoms. Our goal here is really to decrease the number of kids who are being identified as having a mental health concern. And certainly I know from working with high school kids that oftentimes kids that we would see at the high school level who were involved in the juvenile justice system were at risk of getting kicked out of school. Those are kids, when you looked at their records over time, oftentimes had behavior concerns in preschool and elementary school, right? And so really trying to find a way to be able to identify and provide support to those kids early on. Ann Maston is does seminal research in our field and talks about this developmental cascades model. And I know this might be a little bit hard to see down here, but conducted a study over a number of years that show that kids who have internalizing behaviors over time, those internalizing behaviors persist, right? But what she also found, her and her colleagues found that externalizing behaviors over time can lead to problems with academics, right? So kids tend to struggle, oftentimes are doing worse in school. And then that in itself can lead to kids as they get older to recognize their challenges and struggles and can then result in internalizing behavior concerns. So we see a lot of comorbidity between kids who have more acting out, conduct disorder, ADHD type behaviors, and then eventually even can struggle with depression and anxiety because of some of those concerns. So really, our goal here is to decrease academic concerns, later diagnosis, and then certainly more severe depression, which we know increases rates of risk for suicide. So reviews of literature on targeted or tier 2 interventions reveal that in schools, we've done a great job and continue to need to do more work in supporting externalizing behavior concerns. But there's been less of a focus on how do we help support kids who have some of these more internalized behaviors. There are a number of evidence-based interventions that are out there. So many of you probably like me have looked towards the literature on cognitive behavioral therapies. There are manualized small group treatments out there, most which are developed in clinical settings, so things like Coping Cat, which might be familiar to some of you. I see some head nodding, but oftentimes are 12 to 15 to 20 weeks in nature and can be difficult to get through in a school setting or difficult to transfer into a school setting. Check in, check out. How many have had experience using check in, check out? I feel like at this point I should ask who hasn't used it because it tends to be pretty familiar. The Courage and Confidence Mentor Program is another one out there that has some evidence to support its use. And then today here to talk a little bit more about REP. But again, some of these tend to be more tier 2 oriented. Some tend to be more appropriate for kids who may have more significant internalizing behaviors and need more support at tier 3. All right, so approximately 5 years ago, we started development of the Resilience Education Program. This is a cover for one of our curricula, and it is designed off the premise of being cognitive behavioral instruction. It's not designed to be therapy. There's therapeutic aspects of it, but that's why we refer to it as CBI instead of CBT. It has a cognitive behavioral orientation, but is meant to be more instructional by nature. It consists of 3 different components. The first component is a small group that is taught across 5 weeks. So there's 5 units across 5 weeks. It's designed to support 3 to 5 kids per group. And REP at this point is supporting kids in grades 4 through 8. So we find that kids in later elementary school start to show more signs of depression or anxiety or withdrawal. And so really feel like it's most appropriate for that later elementary age group. And then certainly for middle schools as well. We have plans to develop a high school curriculum, but that is in the works. And so the goal of, or what we're sharing with you today is the curriculum for kids in grades 4 through 8. The units themselves focus on coping skills, cognitive restructuring, and problem-solving skills. And we'll walk you through those units and share with you some of the lessons today. And then the second component is modified check-in, check-out. So it has similar components to what you might be familiar with check-in, check-out, where kids are meeting with a mentor who's giving them positive reinforcement at the beginning and the end of the day. But we've modified it in a bit through the use of the daily progress report form, which we'll show you. Our goal here is really to help kids receive positive reinforcement when their teachers and parents see them using some of the skills that they've learned in group. So the goal here is to really generalize that core instruction that's happening in group and for kids to get reinforcement on that throughout. And then the third component is resilient families. Andy was really helpful in helping us develop a parent training on key skills. And then how do we support CBI and check-in, check-out in the home? Our theory behind REP, I talked a little bit about the cognitive behavioral nature that's designed to be student-oriented and to help kids learn key social emotional skills. It's aligned with other probably SEL curricula that you've seen in terms of its format. So it's meant to be school-friendly and accessible for kids at school. And then the check-in, check-out, and resilient families components are more ecologically oriented. We want again, those skills kids are learning in group to generalize into home and school environments and for kids to maintain some of what they've learned over time. So we really promote prompting and reinforcement of the skills over time. REP is designed to be efficient, right? It's designed to last a few weeks. Check in, check out, hopefully a few minutes per day for teachers and mentors. And then certainly want it to be relevant. Again, talked about how it's aligned with other interventions that are already being implemented in schools, and is also appropriate for kids who are showing both signs of depression and/or anxiety. So there's not necessarily a need for separate groups, depending upon the needs that the kids might be having when they meet with you. So this is just an overview. This shows over the 10-week time period, when the group starts was when we would recommend that check-in, check-out, and resilient families would also begin. And then they would run concurrently, all three components for 5 weeks. The goal in having check-in, check-out go for 9 or 10 weeks is really, again, to maintain the skills that the kids have learned in group and that they're receiving reinforcement for that from parents and family members even after the group is over. And when we talk about resilient families really focuses on having an initial collaborative meeting with parents where hopefully the teacher can also participate to learn more about what the parents are seeing at home to be able to provide helpful examples that can be integrated into the group sessions. We offer coaching to parents throughout that active implementation, but it's really designed to be parent-centered. So if you have parents who want their child to participate, but maybe aren't as interested in engaging in the school, that's okay. But if you have parents that are like, hey, I don't know what to do, my child won't talk to me, they're really checked out, I want some ideas. There's ideas and lessons for how you as a facilitator of REP can really engage with parents and provide some ongoing support that's linked to what is happening in the group as well. And then that ongoing consultation still happens in those last 5 weeks as well. All right, so have 3 published studies to date on REP and 2 more that are under review. Our first study was done with Amanda Allen, who's a faculty member in Florida. Amanda worked with 3 students in a small group on REP using single case design and engaged in direct observations of the kids in class over time while the REP intervention was going on. We evaluated negative affect, kids' internalizing concerns, as well as social engagement. And you can see over time, if any of you are familiar with single case research, we saw improvements for 2 of the 3 students, that their negative affect declined, as well as their internalizing concerns decreased. And we saw an increase in their ability to engage socially with others. We just had a second study come out using single case design. We had 3 different groups of REP, but using single case design just evaluated 1 student in each group. And through teacher direct behavior ratings, had teachers provide quick behavior ratings, if anybody's familiar with DBRs, on kids internalizing problems, both withdrawal and negative affect, as well as their social engagement. And so you can see here, we saw, again, improvements for 2 of the 3 kids. The third student down here, we had some floor effects where the student just didn't show many concerns in the classroom. So it wasn't possible necessarily for us to have more of a decrease of behaviors that just weren't as prevalent. And this was a rating of crying, so it wasn't a great measurement in general. But the teacher really felt like the student struggled with crying in the classroom, but to be able to capture that when you're there observing a student, right? Not always easy, and may not have been when we did the observations. So, but 2 of the students and multiple other students in class, we found really did benefit. Our final study was done with Kayla Kilpatrick, and we had students, almost 50 students in grades 4 through 7 at 4 different schools who were randomized to intervention and waitlist control groups. We found that over time that teachers reported large effect sizes of decreases in internalizing behavior concerns after REP was over, and that students reported increased coping skills, social support, and control of their internal states after the group was over. Which is great. In all of our studies, we also do acceptability ratings, like how feasible is this? Is this an efficient use of your time? What feedback do you have on REP? And found that teachers reported high levels of acceptability. So shows you a little bit about the research. We currently have a grant from the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the research arm of the Department of Education at the federal level. We're currently in year 3. So the first year and 2 years, it was put on a 2-year hiatus because of the pandemic. But the first year of the grant, we did focus groups of teachers, of school mental health professionals, and parents, as well as content experts in this field. They gave us lots of feedback on REP, which allowed us to make revisions to the curriculum before we put it out into the field to test it out. Last year, we worked with local schools, elementary and middle schools, and trained school social workers and school psychologists and counselors to implement REP in local schools and take it and use it on their own with little support from us. And we found really positive outcomes with the kids. And they told us the good, the bad, and the ugly of the curriculum of what to change. We were really honest, which was great. And generally, the feedback was really positive. Just lots of ways that we could give kids tools that they would have some of the acronyms at their table that they could use. So we'll show you some of those changes that we made. And then this year, we're doing a component analysis where we're looking at, of the 3 components of REP, what do you need all 3 for it to be successful? So sometimes people find that maybe parents aren't as engaged. So if it exists as just the group and check out, do we see the same components that we would if we had all 3 in place? And then we have another group of schools that are just implementing the small group, CBI, I call it REP, but CBI, and check out, or I'm sorry, they're doing CBI and resilient families without check out. So again, looking at, do we see the same positive outcomes? And hopefully this time next year, we'll be able to tell you what that looks like. And then year 4 next year, we'll be engaged in having a number of other schools implement REP. All right, so let's show you what the curriculum looks like. This is the cover of our curriculum for grades 6 through 8. We created 2 different versions. Many of you, if you've worked at elementary and middle schools, know kids are different, right? 4th graders are much different than 8th graders and are going to connect with different types of examples and videos and visuals. So we have an elementary school and a middle school curriculum. There are 5 different units for the CBI. The first unit focuses on team building and helping the kids get to know you, especially if they've never met you before, as well as to get to know one another. The second unit focuses on identifying strong feelings. So what are triggers for kids? What are things that they might be experiencing at home? How do they use coping skills to manage emotions? Using cognitive restructuring for unit 4, and then walking through problem solving strategies. So How many of you are familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral instruction? Okay, so it looks like about half. So we know that there is a strong connection between all of our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, right? And cognitive behavioral therapy and theory really focuses on how do we help all of us develop more helpful thoughts, maybe be in control of our feelings so that our behaviors are what we need them to be. So for example, in schools, we might have a student who is triggered by the teacher asking for volunteers in class, right? Or for asking a student to answer a question in class. So a student's automatic thought to that might be, I'm not going to raise my hand. I'm going to forget what I was going to say, right? Like, I don't want the teacher to call me. What if I give the wrong answer? So they start to feel worried or embarrassed. They might, right? Their stomach they may have somatic concerns that come along with that. And so they don't put up their hand and they don't speak up in class. With REP and other CBT-oriented approaches, the goal here is to help kids develop a more helpful thought, to be able to say, I can do this, I know the answer, I might write it down, right? What are some strategies I can do to give myself more confidence? And also, we work with them to do some things to calm down. So we have things called STEW skills. See the trigger, take a deep breath or take a belly breath and use your imagination. And we'll walk through, I'll show you where that's at in the lesson. But helping kids be able to do some calming down strategies are ways that they can, right, see this connection between their feelings and how it's impacting their behavior. Okay, so the general setup of the group, we recommend 3 to 5 students per group. That might seem somewhat small, but we know for kids who might be more shy or withdrawn at school, if you put a big group together, right, they're probably not going to feel as comfortable talking and want to make it as much of a personalized experience as possible. So we have run groups with 6, you can, but recommend 3 to 5 as an ideal size. If you do less than 3, so if you have 1, that's not a group, but if you have 2 kids, certainly they can feel a lot of pressure to have to speak up. And so 3, that minimum of 3 tends to go well. The curriculum is set up to be in 5 units. You can teach each week for an hour. So you can do it once a week for an hour, and that would cover the entire unit. Or you can break it up into 2 30-minute sessions over the week. The research on social skills instruction really shows that it's more efficacious if you can do it multiple times per week. Now, I know from being a practitioner, that can be really challenging to try to find time in your schedule. But for some folks, they may have an intervention block a few times a week for half an hour. You may have it be once a week for an hour. So it really provides some flexibility in terms of how to implement the group. We would recommend thinking about if you're working at a middle school with kids in grades 6 through 8, 6th graders are really different than 8th graders. And so I love the pictures of like kids when they start in 6th grade and then what they look like when they finish 8th grade, because a lot of times there's a lot of growth and development that happens. So you certainly could do specific grade level groups for like all 6, all 7, but we have had good success doing 6 and 7 or 7, 8 groups, just making sure that you consider what the nature of the concern is and if the kids are going to get along and connect with one another. We really focus on group expectations, so praising and reinforcing when kids participate even a little bit and are working towards identifying and talking more about some of their own challenges or difficulties. With all groups, we recommend that you spend some time reviewing limits of confidentiality, right? To be able to talk to kids about what's said in the group, should stay in the group, knowing that as a school-based mental health provider, a co-facilitator of the group, you're a mandated reporter. So if a kid is at risk of harming themselves or if somebody's hurting them, we certainly would want to let somebody else know. As far as who can lead the group, our recommendation is that there's 2 people, 2 co-facilitators, and that one is a school-based mental health professional. So when I say school mental health professional, I think school psychologist, school counselor, school social worker, because of your background in training and leading groups. The second person could be lots of different individuals at school. We've had paraprofessionals and aides co-facilitate. We've had teachers. We've had parent volunteers we've trained to be a part of this, and elective or specials teachers. So it really has some flexibility. We have practicum students and interns who've also helped co-lead groups. And you can lead it by yourself if you need to. But the second person really comes in handy with some of the examples. We do some role plays. There's certain conversations we recommend where you break. If you have a group of 5 students, you might want to have a conversation with one person talking to 2 students and one person talking to 2 or 3 of the students there. And if you have a student who becomes emotional or needs to leave or needs to talk to somebody individually, having co-facilitator allows somebody to be able to leave the room if needed. In terms of identification of students for rep, how many of you do universal screening at your school for behavior or mental health concerns? Okay. I'm doing a session on it this afternoon. If you want to come, we'll talk all things screening. But if you have screening data available, we recommend that kids who are in the elevated or at-risk range on an internalizing subscale would be most appropriate for rep. That's typically what we've used for most of our groups that we've implemented in schools. And so depending upon what measure you're using, if there's a subscale that gets at internalizing behaviors, then to be able to look at kids that might be in that at-risk range. Kids who are in the clinically significant range, if you have that data available, it's not that they wouldn't benefit from rep, it just may not be enough. They may need something more than what rep would provide. So that's where the focus is on that targeted group. For schools that aren't doing universal screening, you obviously probably have a lot of data on your students to know if this group would be appropriate. We've also had teachers just fill out a screener, even if they're not doing it class-wide, for us to get some brief information on the student to see if they're appropriate for the groups. Most of the screening measures are 20 to 25 items. They're pretty quick, but they give you at least some indication of where the teacher views the student's concerns and or having the student or parent fill that out to give you some indication of what might be going on as well. Yeah, so can folks share what they might be using in the room? I'd be curious. Sabers, yeah. Yeah, the Sabers is great. The Sabers has internalizing subscale. The BASC-3 BESS, Behavioral and Emotional Screening System, has research on it. The Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire is another one. The SRSS, Student Risk Screening Scale, the revised version now has an internalizing scale on there. So those are some of the more, I guess, widely known ones that have evidence to support their use in schools. Does that help? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Sabers is through FastBridge. If anybody is doing academic screening through the FastBridge module, Sabers is kind of the companion for behavior to that, if you're familiar with that term. Great. All right, so the materials that are a part of REP, we have the small group curriculum. It's a manualized curriculum, so you can take and use it. It walks you through each lesson and provides a script, but it can be adapted to your needs. You don't have to sit there and read, similar to like second step, you don't have to sit, there's no cards, but you don't have to sit and read the manual, but it does provide some structure if that seems easier for you. There is workbooks for students. So it provides all the handouts and homework that go along for the student piece. Daily progress report forms, there's ideas of what you could include. And then there are printed picture and cue cards. Supplemental materials that you might have available at your own school, we'd encourage you to just have access to either a tablet or a laptop, because there are links to some videos and online resources that you can use in each of the units. And then there are certain lessons where it's helpful to have like a chalkboard or whiteboard or paper and marker to write down some of the students' responses. Each of the lessons and units includes the same format. So at the beginning of each lesson, it talks about what are the general objectives of the lesson. What do you want all kids to learn? It follows a direct skills instruction model where we go through what are the concepts that you're going to be teaching and then what materials do you need for the group. It follows a say, show, do model. So the first part is direct instruction and goes over what are the concepts. And then the second piece is show. So giving examples through modeling and or video demonstration of what it looks like in the real world outside of this group format. And then do is giving the students an opportunity to practice. So if any of you like role plays, take you back to your grad school days, you can role play with kids, different scenarios and situations. And then it also gives an opportunity for kids to be able to be engaged and for them to talk a little bit more about their own personal experiences. There are pieces where we ask the kids to do some things from week to week. I hate the word homework because I always feel like that's connected to academics, but we give them a task or something to be thinking about or working on from week to week, and then a summary at the end for what they learned. At the end of each unit, we also provide modification ideas of how you could modify the curriculum based on the student identities in your group. So there's individual diversity considerations, thinking about kids from different racial and ethnic backgrounds or linguistic or language backgrounds of what their first language or second language might be. Moving and grooving, adaptations for active students, right? I tend to be a person, as you can see me like swaying back here and fidgeting, that has a hard time sitting still. So if you have kids who maybe struggle to sit still for half an hour, ways that you can get them up and engaged, and then different ways to modify the homework based on the home environment for the students. And I'll show you an example of these here in just a second. All right, so the first lesson focuses on introductions, and we're not going to walk, because of our timing today, we're not going to walk through each of the lessons, and you can take it and look at it afterwards or after today, but at least wanted to give you a snapshot of what each of the units look like today. So the beginning of lesson 1, having you go over what the group purpose and rules are, and that the kids become familiar with what the structure of the group is, including when you're going to meet, how they can expect that you're going to show up in their room, or if they should just come to you a certain time each week, and then what check and check out procedures will look like. Okay, so the first lesson, we walk through the group rules. Some of these might be connected to what your school-wide expectations are. And it might be other group rules that you want to integrate into REP, but also giving the chance for the students to brainstorm any ideas that they might have for rules in the group. In that first group, we use that same say, show, do model using group rules as an example. So we might say the rule of being respectful and use an example of taking turns, right? So the kids get to practice taking turns in the icebreaker that they do. The curriculum provides like 2 or 3 different ideas of icebreakers, things like the M&M game where you bring a bag of M&Ms, kids grab a couple, and then depending upon the color they pick, they get to share something about themselves, right? And each color stands for something different. You certainly could integrate other types of icebreakers too, but we provide like 2 or 3 different ideas. We walk through what check and check out is, and then certainly helping the kids to get to know each other. I can say with check and check out, I had a kid, I think he was a 6th grader once. We were in the first group and I brought out the daily progress report form and he goes, I don't want that. I don't want that. That's for the bad kids. Right. And he had identified that like the sheet is something that other kids at school use for check and check out, but he himself didn't want to have that like target on his bag. And so this was a school where the kids had tablets that they used. So we were able to create a Google form with him that he could have his daily progress report form on his tablet. So he felt more comfortable using it, which was I think a nice modification. And we'll talk about check and check out in a minute, but another thought is it's different than regular check and check out or standard check and check out where you're going to every single teacher. In REP, we really focus on having the students identify a teacher that they trust and that they would feel comfortable giving them positive feedback on using some of the skills learned in rep. So it may just be like one teacher in the morning or one teacher in the afternoon if they're in middle school, or it could be their classroom teacher if they're still in elementary school, but just not happening as frequently given the nature of what they're being rated on. Okay, so that's a bulk of the first unit. The second unit gets into identifying feelings. So we want kids here to be able to identify and name strong emotions that they're feeling, and to be able to recognize how they can be in control of those feelings. We walk through what their triggers are, and then we describe what happens to thinking and behavior when they experience some of those strong emotions. One of the ways we introduce this is we have a link to an emotions color wheel. Has anybody used something like this before? Yeah, cool. I really like it. It's online. You can just hover your mouse over one of the feelings, and then this pops up. So you might ask the kids, if you just see the face, how do you think the student is feeling? Why are we not? And it gives a definition of what that feeling is, how it's used in a sentence, and it shows the picture of a student, and they're students from all different backgrounds with different types of feelings. So just one way to be able for kids to show, they might see a kid who's disappointed, interested, engaged, and you, for each picture, could say, what's happening here? How do you think the student's feeling? How are other kids reacting? And what is it in the picture that tells you that student might be feeling that way? Oftentimes we try to make connections throughout the group. How many people, who else has ever felt this way before? What was the time that you felt this way? So that kids can start to make connections to themselves. In the elementary curriculum, we have kids draw feelings on their body. So we bring in colored markers or colored pencils, where kids can really hone in on what are those body clues that tell us when we're feeling sad, anxious, angry, excited. So I've seen kids draw red fists, like a ball of red around their fists of when they get so mad, right? That they just feel this anger in their fists. I had another kid draw a green stomach because he said he just feels queasy in school. He just doesn't feel good. So for him, it's more of like a somatic complaint or a physical way that he feels his anxiety at school. And so it's just a good kind of creative way for kids to be able to hone in on what are those body clues that they have when they're starting to feel those big feelings. We then go into triggers. We tried really hard to come up with a different word than trigger, but keep circling back to this, right? Certainly helping kids hone in on what is it that's making them feel a strong emotion. So it might be taking a test, maybe when they get a bad grade or get feedback they don't want to hear, or losing a game, and then help the kids brainstorm some ideas of triggers and what are related feelings that go along with that. Okay, so that was the say portion. This lesson 2 is probably one of our longer ones, but the say portion offers a lot of opportunities at the secondary and elementary level to talk to the kids about strong feelings. Moving into the show portion, this is an example or vignette that we provide to the kids. So Maya just found out she didn't get picked for the basketball team. This made her sad and angry. She took a big belly breath and started to feel better. Then she went to talk to her friend who also didn't get picked. They both decided they'll work really hard so they can try out for the team again next year. So the kids get to identify, what was the strong emotion that Maya was feeling? What do you think were her triggers in here? And then did she take control of her strong emotions, and how did she do it? So it not only just talks about, again, those triggers and feelings, but asking the kids, what do you think she did? Did that work? How else could she have responded, right? She could have got mad and threw something. She could have yelled and not wanted to go back to school or given up on basketball. But what were the positive things that she did following that example? And then for the do portion of the lesson, we transition into students' personal experiences. So what might be a time that you had a strong feeling or emotion? How did your body feel? Right? What were you thinking or feeling? And while you were feeling that way, and then what did you do? And so certainly hearing the kids' stories, giving everybody a chance to share, but not forcing kids to participate if they don't want to. But again, offering that opportunity for kids to share more about their own feelings. We also talk with kids about what do you do with feelings, right? Certainly we can't hurt others and we can't avoid feelings forever. So I've definitely seen kids in rep groups who like try to suppress or push down their feelings. Like, well, I just don't want to talk about it. Or I don't really have any feelings. Like, well, you do. How can we really tap into making sure that kids feel comfortable with this? So, and sometimes that happens a little bit outside of the group. One of the things we found also really helpful is during the pandemic I guess we're still in the pandemic, but when we were all virtual, last summer we ran rep groups virtually, fully virtual online. And our co-facilitators of the group, we have a school psychology training clinic on campus. And so we had faculty and grad students co-facilitating groups. And what we ended up doing is because it wasn't being run during the school year, it was over the summer, we didn't have check in, check out mentors for the kids, but instead one of the people co-facilitating the group served as a mentor and had some one-on-one time twice a week with each kid for about 5 or 10 minutes. And it was really amazing how just that individual time that they had outside group like had such a positive influence when kids came to group, right? Because they were building a strong relationship with one of the group leaders and were able to then bring that back to the group where they, even if they didn't know the other kids, they were building that relationship with the facilitator that they felt more comfortable to share. So if you have an opportunity at your school where you're there, I know not everyone's at their school full time to be a mentor. Certainly co-facilitators of the group can also be check in, check out mentors. And sometimes that can help kids feel more comfortable in groups too. All right, last piece of lesson 2 are the modifications options. So this is an example of what is listed at the end of group 2. So you can see here the individual diversity considerations, encouraging discussion related to how different people show their emotions. Some families look different than others when they're angry, for example, yelling, silent treatment, etc. My partner, he's from the East Coast, and he always jokes that like all their feelings, we don't talk about feelings, like, right, that those are repressed. So in his family, there wasn't an acceptance of a full range of feelings, right? Or at least they didn't want to see it. And my feeling, I remember when we were first a couple, I have like a full range of feelings. If I'm angry, you know I'm angry. If I'm sad, you know I'm sad, right? And for him, he's like, what's happening here? And so that plays out for kids, right? In their homes, everybody's different. And so giving examples of what that looks like with their families and for kids to be able to share those examples are super helpful. In our groups too, we developed one time a Kahoot, if you're familiar with Kahoot, a group where kids could use not only icebreaker activities, but we went over skills they had learned in group that day and found a way to engage kids in a more active way as well. So there's lots of ways to make some modifications in that curriculum. Okay, so lesson 3 is focused on using coping skills. So now in lesson 2, where we talked about those triggers and strong feelings, in lesson 3, we then move into how do we cope, right? How do we move into stopping escalating emotions, using the triggers that they've identified, and then focusing more on some of those STU skills. So we know that using coping strategies can help kids decrease how often they might be feeling sad or anxious, and then want them to be able to stay in control of their feelings so that they can make better choices. So one of the acronyms we use is focusing on STU skills. The first is see the trigger and talking to kids about what that is. T is take a break or take a belly breath, right? So helping kids breathe in through their nose, hold it, exhale through their mouth, and repeat, as well as helping kids use their imagination. So do they need to visualize a calm place or a happy place? What does that look like? Who you're there with? What might be going on? So walking through some of these steps so that when they have those things that are triggering to them, they have some different coping skills to address those strong feelings. During the group, we have the kids review what their triggers were that they had from the first unit and to be able to share those with one another. We practice taking belly breaths so the kids learn what that looks like. The facilitators demonstrate, the kids get to do that actively with the facilitator. And that's the primary focus, is the coping skills portion. When the kids leave, this is the homework for lesson 3. That's or part of it that's listed up here. So it says, talk with someone who takes care of you, like a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, or even a sibling, about the skills. And then talk with your parent and caregiver about the following things. So this first portion here says, here's how I'd like you to recognize me when I'm doing a good job or having a good day. Circle 1 or 2 ideas. And I remember talking to kids, going over this before they were practicing. And a 6th grader said, God, my mom still gives me stickers. I don't like stickers. I'm not a baby. Why does she keep giving me stickers, right? So he was really excited to go home and talk to his mom about like, hey, here's other ways that you can give me something that's like positive for me. And I don't know that we always do a good job of that, right? Of just like making sure that what we're doing as adults are meeting the needs of kids. The second piece says, here's how I'd like you to help me when I'm having a hard time, and circle 1 or 2 ideas. So whereas some kids like to be hugged or touched or cuddled when they're feeling sad, other kids don't want that, right? And so giving them a language or a worksheet where they can kind of talk through this with a parent or caregiver. Maybe they just want some time alone, right? Or maybe they want to go draw or paint or engage in some type of art activity. So again, helping the kids maybe even come up with some other ideas of things that may not be on this sheet. We then ask the kids to schedule a time to do something that might be more hard for them, where we need them to practice some of their coping skills, and then to spend time doing something that they enjoy with their parent as well. Okay. The last piece is an ABC log. So in lesson 2, we introduce them to this, and then they get a chance to use it for a second week. So those of you who have behavior orientation or ABA background, right? We talk about antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. But for kids, really thinking about what was the trigger? How did it make you feel before those behaviors or feelings? Thinking about, did you use a STU skill, and what skill did you use? What happened right after? How did you feel? And then did you do any other coping skills, like doing something you enjoy? So giving a chance the kids just to find an example that happened during the week that they can then bring back to group the next week, where they hopefully practice some of these things. All right, lesson 4, choosing helpful thoughts. So we want kids to be able to show how they can stop escalating emotions, how they can use cognitive restructuring. We don't call it that with the kids, but that's what it is, to be able to reduce unhelpful thoughts and increase helpful self-talk. When we first created this, we at first were calling it positive thoughts, but then we realized we're talking to kids about feelings being good or bad, right? Or positive or negative. We really don't want to use that language that some feelings are bad feelings, right? We want kids to know, like, having a full range of emotions and feelings is fine. It's what you do with those feelings that are important. And so we changed it to helpful and unhelpful thoughts. And what Steve, my colleague, choose helpful thoughts. He loves that we have CHET, right? And we'll show you the acronym here. So we know that altering our thinking can prevent strong emotions and unhelpful behavior, and then staying in control of your emotions can help make better choices. So in this unit, we have pictures that will show the students, and hopefully you can see those up there, where we just ask the kids or the students, let's look at the first picture. What do you think is happening? And the students come up with, it looks like the student's taking a test. I had a kid once who looked at it and said, I don't think she can read. I bet she can't read, and like, I don't necessarily love projective tests for diagnoses, but I think they're really interesting in groups to pull in, like, what are kids thinking about? Like, what are they experiencing? Is some of that coming out by some of the examples they're giving? So other pictures, right? What about picture 2? I'm going to fail. I can't do this. And then how do we help the student above, right? So what do you think the student is doing? Wait a minute, I do know the answer. I can do this. I just need to try my best. So we try to walk through some more helpful thought patterns that the kids, we want the kids to experience. The say portion also walks through what does it mean to have unhelpful thoughts? What does that look like? So saying things like, I can't do it. I'm not smart enough. People don't like me. People are gonna think I'm stupid if I give the wrong answer. Something bad might happen. And so the kids get a chance to brainstorm that. And then we walk through how to choose helpful thoughts. So what are the times when you have unhelpful thinking or feeling? How can you choose a helpful thought instead to be able to say, I can do this. It's going to be okay. The teacher won't let me get hurt, or I might be able to try this new thing, and have the kids be able to brainstorm some of those examples. Okay, so that's lesson 4. And then just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going through this pretty quick so I can show you the other 2 components. Lesson 5, I will share one story. This last week this last year when we were implementing REP, we have graduate students who go and do fidelity checks. So they go and observe the groups to make sure that each of the steps are being followed. So we have some data on that. And the group, one of our grad students was observing, the kids were in the group and they were learning about helpful thoughts. And one of the kids got up and went over to the window and noticed that his entire rest of the class was out having an extra recess while he was at group. And he goes, I'm not having helpful thoughts. I'm not having helpful thoughts, right? And one of the kids in the group, I guess, said, it's okay, come over. Like, you're in this group, you get to be with us. That's helpful. Like we can be, we're together. So anyway, just pretty funny. He took what he was learning, but he's like, I'm not having helpful thoughts. They're having recess without me, which I'd be pretty upset too. All right, so the 5th lesson is problem solving skills, right? The focus here is helping kids understand that they're in control of their emotions and how to solve problems using a think and act process. We want the kids to know that when they're calm, they can make better choices. And then certainly that can help us at home and at school to be able to get along with others better. And really for many kids, just feel more confident in who they are and how they're operating in the world. So the say portion really walks through helping kids understand that once they've used some of the STU skills and can feel calm, that they can consider their choices. What are helpful choices? What are hurtful choices? What will happen if you make a helpful choice or hurtful choice? And then be able to walk through that road. If this thing happens to me and I do this, what might come next? If I go down this road, what are going to be the outcomes of that choice, and to try it out. So there's a solutions wheel that we offer the kids that walks through potential solutions to all kinds of problems that they might be having. And then we have the kids brainstorm some additional solutions. Oftentimes the kids have gotten more comfortable with each other and talking about their feelings, that they're able to bring up more examples of what's happening in their day-to-day life, where they can, they themselves can share with one another. Oh, I heard that you said that you weren't getting along with your friend. Do you think that next time you can compromise? Here's what it would look like. And they start telling each other how to help support one another, which is great. So certainly want the kids to be able to help problem solve with one another and normalize that a bit. Okay, so that's a snapshot of the curriculum. And let me tell you about the other 2 portions. And I want to make sure I leave a couple minutes at the end for questions. I'll ask my moderator, we wrap up at 12:30 or 11:30, I mean. I know I'm just standing between you and lunch, so I want to be mindful of that and not have you miss lunch. But we have about 15 more minutes. Any questions on CBI before I move on to check and check out? Okay, great. So has anybody in here not heard of check and check out or seen it used at their school? Awesome. Okay, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about check and check out. This is actually only about 4 slides. But you can read here what typical check and check out has seen. You've probably experienced it. The modified components that we have is to really modify what the expected behaviors are. So check and check out usually has school-wide expectations at the top, or maybe some modified examples depending upon kids' behavior. But the skills that we've selected are aligned with what they're learning in group, as well as helping them identify one other positive behavior, as well as helping not only a teacher assess their behavior throughout the day, but also themselves. So this is a modified DPR where we include, did kids control their emotions and did they make good choices? And then they get to pick a third behavior. We also have the kids assess their own feelings of how they felt for that day. So this one says morning work, English, math, science, and the kids get to create their own self-rating. What this does is it helps us understand how are the teacher ratings aligning with how the kids are feeling about themselves. And sometimes those are in perfect alignment and it makes a lot of sense. And other times it might be the teacher's giving them a 0, like, no, you didn't control your emotions or make good choices. And the kid's like 7, it was a great day, right? And so that offers an opportunity for you to say, you know, for in checkout or maybe even in group, if you're co-facilitating and have some time to meet with a student, like, hey, it looks like, you know, your teacher felt like you were having a hard time, but you seem to think everything was okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And so the kid gets a chance to talk with you a little bit more about personal examples and really honing in on what was happening and how they were feeling and acting. So making some more of those connections throughout the day. The goal is for teachers as all check and check out hopefully is, to be focused on the positive and give praise and then minimize attention to inappropriate behavior. Okay, so some examples. So great check-in. Hey, it's great to see you. Way to be on time. Happy Friday. Give them a compliment. This is kind of check-in examples. Where have you, and not so great examples, like where have you been? I've been waiting. I sure hope today is better than yesterday. Why didn't you bring back your sheet? How could you forget, right? And all of us have probably heard maybe examples on both columns, but maybe giving examples to the mentors about what are some good check-in examples and what would be non-examples. Similar to what we do with kids, it turns out adults need those examples too, right? So some other check out examples. Great job. You earned this many points. I really like how hard you worked today. Keep it up. Thank you for being so respectful, and that should say kind towards others, not kid. I'm so proud of you. But sometimes what we hear, like, what happened? It looks like today was terrible. I hope you can do better tomorrow, right? You need to stop getting zeros. What's going on this week? So again, hopefully providing some constructive coaching and consulting or collaborating with a teacher if you see more of those negatives going on. And then last but not least, hopefully having parents cued in on home-based reinforcement, creating a routine for them to review the check and check out forms at home, and if possible, to provide praise and a small privilege if needed. And then certainly acknowledging the child's feelings while examining the mood ratings as well. Okay, any questions about check and check out? Zoom's good? Okay, I'm realizing I haven't looked, so I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, and then the final component is resilient families. Now, this is sometimes the part of the presentation that we get to, and folks are like, well, could we do this intervention without parents? It's really hard to get parents to engage. Or like, what does this look like? I have some parents, but if I pull them in, then they're going to be in my office every day. And like, I just don't have time, or I'm not at my school every day to manage some of that. The focus on resilient families is really to have integrated family support and collaboration. So it's grounded in features of family-centered and family school community partnership programs. You all have Sue Sheridan down the street and Beth Stormjack, who've done a lot of work in this component. It's really focused on being brief and goal-directed and certainly motivationally oriented, and provides a framework for really tailoring REP to meet the needs of the family that you're working with. So it's not, whereas the CBI has some set lessons and structure to it, Resilient Families offers some different options and flexibility depending upon the family that you're working with and what they want and what type of support that they would like. So the key features of Resilient Families includes an initial collaborative meeting that's supposed to focus on the strengths of the child between the parent or caregiver, and hopefully having the teacher present as well, along with a co-facilitator or whoever's leading REP at your school. So those 3 people together work on identifying goals and planning for obstacles and how do we facilitate engagement with the student. There's ongoing positive parenting support. So families receive weekly materials of what the kids are learning. All of that, we have crafted emails already that you can cut and paste to send out to parents to make it more efficient. That goes over what kids are learning in groups so they get that at the beginning of the week and can talk to their kids at home about what they're learning in group. And then provide some examples of how families can engage with their child in some home-based activities. Family coaching sessions are offered, so families can receive a brief goal-directed coaching session to support implementing REP at home with their child. And then at the end, we ask, so it's bookcased by the initial collaborative meeting at the beginning and the planning for success meeting at the end. And I'll show you a visual of what that looks like. But the key components of resilient families is really just to increase collaboration between home and school. Because again, REP is designed to be prevention and early intervention, right? It's designed to be for kids who maybe aren't in special education, aren't receiving mental health support, don't have an identified disability or mental health concern at this point, but are showing some early signs that they really could benefit from support. One of the school social workers at the end of REP this last year who was implementing REP said to me, Katie, I have only ever worked with kids in special education. And she's like, it is so cool to be able to do this because I now have this relationship with these kids and I see why tier 2 is important. She's like, I always heard about it and I understood, I just never had time for it. She's like, it makes a lot more sense to me what we're trying to do here. So I think the goal here with resilient families is similar, right? How do we pull families in and center them as the expert of their child and focus on a sensitive and responsive communication pattern with them? And again, it's really meant to be more goal-directed and action-oriented based on the needs of the family. So this is an outline of what it looks like, right? So that initial collaborative meeting with a parent where you describe REP, and talk about components of this. The family coaching sessions is while the CBI is happening, the small group and check out, the parents are getting some positive support from the school. And then it's bookend by this planning for success meeting at the end. So again, initial collaborative meeting, these are some of the key components, but is meant to introduce parents to REP, to help identify some strategies for addressing or coping with barriers that they might be experiencing at home, and then identifying ways for maybe the teacher and the parent to stay connected. One of the things that we've changed about the curriculum is in the past, we used to just ask the co-facilitators of the group to send home the email to the parent about what was happening in group. And at the end, our teacher said, could I be CC'd on those emails? You know, could I also know what the parents are getting so I'm able to do that? And we were doing like separate emails. We're like, duh, we're not even like modeling what we're telling, you know, what we're asking teachers and parents to do together. And so now it's set up that everybody's getting the same communication so that if a parent's like, hey, thanks for checking in, here's what's going on at home, the teacher and the co-facilitator have the chance, or school mental health professional can all talk about that and be on that same correspondence, which is really cool. The positive parenting support, that's what's happening throughout REP. So there's CBI homework describing how families can support their child at home. And then this is an example from the Identifying Feelings Week. So parents know what to expect, okay? Your child has a sheet around what's happening at home. Here's how you can support your child at home. When you see them using this sheet, here's feedback you can give. And then your child might be asking you about strong emotions you experience, so parents can be prepped for like, why are you asking me these questions? Okay. We offer some flyers, and I know I'm going through this fairly quickly, on emotion coaching and what positive communication looks like. There's another pamphlet talking about how parents can engage in encouragement and why it's important with their child. And then again, we have that the family coaching sessions really, again, are meant to be brief. We ask we ask the school mental health professionals to engage in that coaching session as parents want. So it might be once, it might be twice, but developing some type of intervention plan. And then finally, at the end, going over what are the child's strengths and family strengths, what has been going well over the 10 weeks of rep, how have people made progress towards their goals, how can you strengthen support and continue that positive communication that's hopefully been established throughout rep, and then hopefully identify ways to stay connected. So this is, again, just the same slide from start to finish. I went through this fairly quickly, and I'm happy to provide all these slides to you so you have those available. But this is what that resilient families piece looks like. The curriculum itself is available at this website. You can download PDFs of the manuals, of the student handbooks, of the examples we gave today. So it's SMH Collaborative, which is our school mental health collaborative. It's our research center between us and USF. So smhcollaborative.org. That'll take you to our main site, but /rep will take you directly to the rep materials.